The Arodenite Ruins, Crowntop Hill, Eternal City of Axis, 4718. The Pactil Tea House had been abuzz with its usual crowd of customers upon their return. The party had gathered at their usual private room, joined by the stern Inspector Licarius Suresh, who they found settled with his hands folded, his sharp gaze assessing their every move. Licarius had said gravely, "The conspiracy goes deeper than we'd initially thought. It seems our next course of action lies at Crowntop Hill." On the way to the ruins, Diyanah also stopped by his grandparents' home once again, collecting a large pile of letters from his grandmother addressed to every living relative of hers that she could think of. He shoved them roughly into his bag of holding, replacing the very last bottle of Frascati Red that he decided would be most appreciated by his grandparents to enjoy at their leisure. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as the group approached the ruins on Crowntop Hill, a crumbling testament to Taldor's long-departed patron deity. At the site, as indicated by the psychic cocktail swarm, the party found themselves standing before a rusted portcullis, partially hidden by creeping ivy. The air was cooler here, and a faint metallic tang hung in the breeze. "It looks old," said Marius, running a hand over the corroded metal bars, "but not unused. Someone's been here." The portcullis, despite its age, appeared surprisingly functional. Its thick iron bars were worn but intact, and faint grooves in the surrounding stone hinted at recent movement. "Only one way to find out," said Diyanah, stepping forward and gripping the base of the portcullis. With Marius's help, the two heaved it upwards, the metal groaning and protesting, but ultimately giving way. A stone staircase led to a small level chamber, carved meticulously from large stone blocks. The air was heavy here, carrying the scent of ancient dust. On the eastern wall, bronze double doors stood sealed, their surfaces dulled to a greenish patina with age. Thick ribbons of red and black wax dripped down the seams where the doors met, the wax itself still vivid, despite the centuries. Dangling from rotting silk ribbons were lead seals, their inscriptions too worn to decipher without closer inspection. Seals aside, the doorframe was remarkable. Intricate Aslanti runes, etched with exacting precision, encircled the doors. At the apex of the frame was the all-seeing eye, the unmistakable symbol of the dead god Aroden. "Looks like some attempt was made to seal this place after Aroden disappeared," noted Suresh, looking over the seals. "Unfortunately, an investigation into possible mail fraud should take precedence here. We'll have to take down the seals and have a look inside." "Let's do it," said Marius, and he dragged the blade of his punch dagger down the center of the door. Then he and Diyanah pushed on the heavy stone doors. They groaned open, revealing a wide entry hall. The dark, glossy stone floors reflected the faint glow of light from wall sconces lit with perpetual flames. Stone ribs lined the wall every 2 feet, converging high above a pointed arch that vaulted 20 feet overhead. At the far end of the hall stood another pair of bronze double doors, their surface marked by faint engravings that were difficult to make out from this distance. To the left and right, narrow passageways branched off into shadowed recesses, their destinations obscured. The air felt colder here, a dry chill that seemed unnatural, and the faint metallic tang in the air was strong as well. 10 feet from the far doors, 2 hulking figures stood motionless, emerald automatons, their forms dulled and corroded by the passage of centuries, their once polished surfaces now rusted and streaked with brown mold. A dim orange-brown light, the color of fire agate, pulsed faintly behind their dormant eye cavities. As the group entered the hall, Diyanah stepped forward, his boots echoing slightly against the polished floor. Around his neck, the pendant of Aroden swung gently, catching the faint light. The automatons remained silent, their heads slightly tilted as though in deference. Marius followed close behind, his eyes scanning the room for threats. The moment he crossed the threshold, the emerald automatons stirred, their movements slow and deliberate, as if awakened from a long slumber. Their voices echoed through the hall, hollow and mechanical. "Only the faithful may pass." The constructs' heads turned in unison towards Marius, their glowing eyes narrowing. The fire agate light within them burned brighter, casting menacing hues across their rusted forms. Diyanah sighed. "I knew we should have picked up more of these Arodenite amulets," he muttered, his dry tone betraying only a hint of frustration. Aurelius, standing just behind the pair, smirked. "Noted for next time," he said, even as he readied himself for a fight. He opted to cast a mirror image spell for protection and sidestepped into one of the adjoining passages. Abruptly, he disappeared. It might have been an invisibility spell, but they had no time to ask. The automatons had shifted into combat stances, their rusted joints screeching with the effort. The glow within their eyes flared more brightly. In other places, that light appeared to spill out through the seams in their armor like liquid fire. Diyanah's stance lowered, muscles coiled for action. Marius and Suresh collided with one of the automatons, while Diyanah and Raja charged the other. Behind them, Demi sang as she fired her crossbow as well. Sure enough, the heroes soon made short work of the Metal Guardians, but Aurelius was still nowhere to be found. Marius looked awkwardly down the shadowed passage, where Aurelius had disappeared. Before he could step forward, though, Aurelius did suddenly appear. He came out of a portal in the air, a dimension door spell. "Don't go that way," he said quickly. "Those hallways are some kind of dimensional trap. Go down that way and you're stuck in an endless looping chamber. Good thing I know the dimension door spell. Not sure how I'd work my way out if I didn't." Marius took a few steps back away from the side tunnel. Forward again?" he asked instead. "Yeah, let's press on," said Aurelius. The bronze doors opened to reveal a grand octagonal chamber. The walls were adorned with faded carvings of celestial scenes, each depicting significant events from Aroden's mortal and post-mortal life. Each of the chamber's 8 sides held either a passageway or an alcove containing remnants of ancient furnishings or forgotten artifacts. In the center of the room, a raised dais drew their attention. Atop it rested a large round orb, its surface smooth and reflective like polished obsidian. Faint etchings swirled across the orb, pulsing with dim magical light. "Could this be the sending stone the cockatiels described?" Demi asked. Aurelius nodded that it seemed like it probably was. Beyond the stone, opposite the main entrance, in a prominent alcove, stood a green stone statue of Aroden. The figure was larger than life, depicted holding the starstone and raising it up to the heavens, the act which earned him his divinity. To the right, an arched passageway disappeared around a bend. To the left, another passageway culminated in a closed door, its surface plain yet sturdy. "If this is the sending stone," said Inspector Suresh, "then let's get this over and summon the dragon." "Let's not be too hasty, Inspector," advised Demi. "We don't want to find ourselves fighting the dragon and other secret allies of his. Let's take a quick moment to look around before we activate the stone." Suresh seemed annoyed, but agreed that might be prudent. The party tried the door to the left first. It was a good thing they had done so as well, because indeed the rest of the old ruin was not abandoned. The opposite room had been filled with a kind of dream-inducing fog, which flooded out as soon as the door was opened, and accompanying the billowing fog were 2 night hags, creatures which, like the cockatiels, had found this abandoned place a safe place to hide in the plane of Axis. The party had already discussed their approach and had planned to hold their most powerful magic in reserve to face the Vortex Dragon, so the battle with the night hags proved a fair bit more difficult than they might have expected. Firstly, one of the hags managed to cast a deeper slumber spell on Raja, which caused Diyanah to take a tumble off the big lion. Secondly, one of the hags managed to get a lucky claw strike on Aurelius, dosing him with a terrible dreaming fever and causing him to convulse on the ground. The party was on the back foot only briefly, though. Marius and Suresh managed to corner one of the hags between the two of them, and that led to the hags succumbing quite quickly to their rapid flanking attacks. Meanwhile, Diyanah wrestled with the other hag, while Demi put a number of crossbow bolts into her back. Soon the second hag, too, had stopped moving. Demi, who could hold her breath indefinitely, scoped out the room with the blue fog, but finding little of interest besides a couple of wands and the night hag dens, she closed the door behind them. Diyanah roused his lion, who was fine, if a little sleepy. Meanwhile, Inspector Suresh revealed some of his other tricks. He wasn't just any seasoned postal investigator. He was an Inquisitor of Abadar, and therefore had access to a certain number of divine powers granted to him by his connection to the god of cities. He lifted the dream fever from Aurelius, and used restoration spells to help him recover from the psychic damage the hags had inflicted. "Get back up to your feet, wizard," said Suresh, pulling Aurelius from the floor. "We have a dragon to deal with." "Okay," said Aurelius wearily. "Let's take a little more care exploring the other passage, please." He cast an invisibility spell on Diyanah. "Think you can have a look around with that Arodenite pendant of yours and let us know if there are any more beasties in here we should worry about?" Diyanah went ahead invisibly to scout out the passage. The passage led to a door, which in turn led to a series of connected rooms, 3 in total. The central room was lined with emerald automatons. One of the rooms back towards the entrance contained a number of sarcophagi, while another room contained only a single such sarcophagus. "Looks like a tomb of some kind," noted Diyanah. "Does that make sense for Axis?" "Absolutely," said Suresh. "We have such a place in Sayashto as well. You must have seen the Hall of Final Deeds as you came into town, right? It's to commemorate those who have undergone dissolution. Postmortals don't die of natural causes, but it's quite common for us to decide that we wish for a final ending of sorts, so we come to a place like this, depending on our god of choice, and our quintessence is dispersed back into the plane of Axis, a true and final ending for our being. So can you get post-mortal zombies and ghosts? Asked Diyanah curiously. Not usually, said Suresh. Typically, dissolution means there's nothing left to reanimate. But nothing is truly impossible in this strange multiverse of ours. Okay, great, said Aurelius. So let's not disturb any of the tombs, just to be safe. Shall we figure out what we're doing about the sending stone? Demi stroked her chin. Can we pretend to be the cockatiel nexus bird somehow? Aurelius raised an eyebrow at her. I think we can. He summoned Rodrigo, and then waved his hands to form an illusion spell. Soon Rodrigo was looking a lot like one of the cockatiels. And now the pièce de résistance, he said, and he pulled the ring off of Diyanah's hand and placed it on Rodrigo's head. Looks exactly right, said Demi. And who better to play the part of a bird than a bird, I suppose? But Rodrigo can't speak, right? I can easily solve that with a ventriloquism spell, said Aurelius. I'll do the talking, Rodrigo will do the acting. Demi nodded at him. Sounded like a perfectly insane plan. Okay, everyone, make yourselves scarce. We don't want the dragon to suspect anything, added Aurelius, and they all cleared the room except for Rodrigo, and Aurelius, who was hiding around the corner of the right corridor. Rodrigo stroked the sending stone with its talon, and the thing blazed with light. Within, Rodrigo could see a dragon streaked with markings of blue and yellow. "What is it, bird?" said the dragon in a snarling tone. It was all down to this, thought Aurelius, as he did his best cockatiel impression. "Brr, we've got some trouble here in Axis, boss," he said in a pretty good impression of the Nexus bird. "There's a Venara postal inspector asking questions. Brr, seems to know about you somehow. I think you need to get me out of here." The dragon paused with surprise. "What's he been asking specifically?" "Brr, about a vortex dragon maybe being spotted around Crowntop Hill," suggested Aurelius. He wasn't sure exactly how much he could say without arousing suspicion. "Anything else?" asked the dragon. "Brr, I'd prefer to discuss in person," said Aurelius, maintaining a good impression of the bird. The dragon groaned. "I'm busy right now, but I can plane shift to the ruins in a couple hours. I'm going to stop coming to Axis after this, though. Sounds like it's getting too risky around there." "That'll work. See you soon," said Aurelius. Rodrigo turned off the sending stone. Aurelius couldn't believe quite how well that whole thing had worked. "Now to lay a trap," said Inspector Suresh. Back above ground, amidst the ruins on Crowntop Hill, the party decided the right plan of attack was to wait a couple of hours and cast an invisibility sphere, and maintain it until the dragon showed up. Sure, the dragon would be suspicious when the bird swarm wasn't present, but they reckoned by the time it had figured out what to do, the party would already be upon him. Unfortunately, the best-laid plans don't always go as intended. What the party had not counted on was that the vortex dragon would have a persistent true-seeing ability, so what actually happened was that the air appeared to come apart above them as the dragon plane shifted in, and then it immediately spotted a clustered group of heroes in the middle of the ruins, thinking they had cleverly hidden themselves with an invisibility spell. The dragon wasted no time. It caught the heroes off guard immediately by blowing a wave of radiant fire that washed over the party. Suresh staggered backwards, his fur singed by the blast, but not completely lit on fire, as he had been dexterous enough to avoid the worst of it. "He can see us," declared the Venara. "Everyone take cover." But everyone did not take cover. The others had all been in a scrape like this before, and they moved with practiced swiftness. Aurelius cast a haste spell, Demi began to sing, and Diyanah slammed the battle standard against the ground to grant everyone magical flight. Just as suddenly, Marius and Raja were tearing through the sky, closing on the dragon. "Or take the fight to the dragon," said Suresh, suddenly changing his mind. He too leapt into the air, taking to the sky and following Diyanah into the fray. Aurelius flew around, casting additional supporting spells, enlarged person on Marius, and then Diyanah in turn. Meanwhile, Demi decided to risk a more offensive spell, targeting the dragon directly, despite the fact that once again she knew this foe would have some form of spell resistance. It was often worth the risk, though, to cast a spell that might turn the tide. This time she opted for Hold Monster, and it worked. It was as if a vast telekinetic fist had closed itself around the dragon. Its wings were clamped down to its side, and without them it could no longer remain airborne. With a thunderous crash, the dragon came down into the ruins of the Arodenite temple. Then Diyanah and Marius, enlarged, landed on each of the dragon's wings, coiled them together, and bound him with Diyanah's iron rope. The battle was over. They had cowed a dragon. Inspector Suresh paced back and forth in front of the dragon. "Uyat, is it?" he asked. You thought you could interfere with the Axis Postal Service and get away with it. The dragon struggled stiffly against the restraint. Is that really what this is about? It asked. It was only a few letters. If I may, said Aurelius, can I ask a few questions? Suresh nodded approvingly and let Aurelius have a go. What happened to Taldaris? He asked. We laid an ambush for him, said Uyat. My co-conspirators took him away. Why did you kidnap him? Asked Aurelius. I'm not sure, honestly, said the dragon. I'm just a contractor. They called on me because I'm big and strong and a dragon, and taking down an inevitable is no small feat, though perhaps not strong enough. This defeat is pretty embarrassing, I must say. Everyone is working for someone else, muttered Aurelius. Okay, who was the mastermind behind the whole operation? Why do you think they wanted Taldaris? You must have heard something. My employer was someone called 1,000 Names, said the dragon. Does that name mean anything to you? Suresh folded his arms. I've heard that name before. He turned to the party. He's supposed to be hiding in Duskfathom somewhere, and he's something of a boogeyman in this part of Axis. 1,000 Names was once a petitioner of the Eternal City, restored, like many here, with riddles etched onto their body. With each colleague who unlocked their secrets before him, he became increasingly jealous, eventually accosting those enlightened petitioners on their way to the adamantine forge. It's said he's now killed hundreds, each time writing the fallen's names into his flesh over one of his original inscriptions. Though we pride ourselves on being a plane of order, I'm afraid evil finds its way here as surely as it does everywhere else. Okay, creepy, said Aurelius, and he turned back to the dragon. And this 1,000 Names guy, you have no idea why he wanted Taldaris? Just tell me everything you know, and you might get out of here with your life. The dragon sighed. I might be dead either way, but here goes. All I know for sure is that 1,000 Names arranged for Taldaris' kidnapping, but he himself was not strong enough for such a task. He recruited me initially, but ultimately I was not up to the task either. Somehow, though, 1,000 Names had drawn the gaze of Norgorber, the Reaper of Reputation himself, Uyat said, and he sent his herald, the stabbing beast, to claim Taldaris. That's how Taldaris was taken. You might have bested me, but you have little chance against the herald. Oh, said Aurelius with a pause. This suddenly all felt significantly above his pay grade. The vortex dragon the party could just barely handle. The herald of a god they certainly could not. Uyat's gaze turned solemn. Look, if the stabbing beast has taken him, then Taldaris is likely being held in the beast's sanctum, the Lost Silhouette, a place of shadow and deceit that lies deep within Norgorber's realm of Duskfathom. I don't believe you will be getting your friend back without some serious allies. Aurelius took a moment to have a side conversation with the party. Could this be real? He asked of them. Could Norgorber himself have taken Taldaris? And if so, why? And what would we even do? Beseech the gods for help? I don't know what we should do about this, said Demi, but I do think there is a thread here that's starting to make sense to me. Taldaris went missing around the time of the Exaltation Day massacre, right? The assassins that killed all the senators were Norgorberites. Wasilica was a disciple of Norgorber, as were all of her friends. If Panavar orchestrated this, then he struck some kind of bargain with Norgorber or his agents, concluded Aurelius. Right, said Demi. Okay, so let's say we believe him, said Marius. Our only option here is to bring this up with Hao Jin and see what she wants to do. This isn't something we're going to be able to handle. The party turned to Inspector Suresh. What are we going to do with the dragon? Suresh was already drawing a summoning circle on the floor. I'm calling on inevitable reinforcements to collect him, explained the inspector. Then you'll all be free to go to continue your investigation into Taldaris with Hao Jin. You won't assist us with that? Asked Marius. It pains me to say this, but I'm afraid my jurisdiction only extends as far as the case of mail fraud is concerned, and that case ends here with the Vortex Dragon. Beyond that, it'll be up to you to solve the rest of this. However, I do want to thank you all for helping me get to the bottom of this whole mess. I wish you the best of luck in finding Taldaris. And with that, the Venara walked off into the sunset. Sayashto, the Eternal City of Axis, 4718. There was still plenty of daylight when Aurelius, Demi, Diyanah, and Marius returned to Sayashto, their home base in the Eternal City. It had been a productive day. That morning they had learned the whereabouts of Prince Carius from the Naga Klakosik in her pleasure garden in Duskfathom. That afternoon they had learned the whereabouts of First Emperor Taldaris from the vortex dragon Uyat at the ruins of Crowntop Hill. Any last loose threads we want to follow up on before we see if Hao Jin and Dyson are ready to meet with us again at the tea house? Asked Demi. We've still not been to the Serene Circle, said Aurelius, and I'd intended to try some scrying on Taldaris. The second thing there is not strictly necessary, since we think we know where he is now, but maybe knowing that I might be able to break some of the scrying wards, or get some additional insights. How would we get to the circle? Asked Demi. Well, said Aurelius, before Hao Jin took off, she spent some time showing me some of her notes. I've been reviewing them over the last couple of nights, and I'd like to try my hands at my first proper teleportation spell. I've taken the liberty of preparing 2 castings, just in case. Wow, okay, said Demi. Our wizard is growing in power. I'm game to try. We'll have to find a place in town with a good picture of the circle, right? Yeah, I'm sure there's a map maker or something like that in town, said Aurelius. There's also one more thing I wanted to share with you all. Aurelius drew out Vadrigan Pole's dagger. I've been attuning with a relic of my own these last few nights. The dagger of Vadrigan's. It's called the Scion's dagger. Here's what I've learned. First, it looks like an ornamental weapon, but it's vicious as a real weapon. Both the large black sapphire here in the dagger's pommel and the delicate work along the blade's handle show pretty amazing artistry. The dagger was apparently forged by Grand Prince Penticus IV to protect his son from a deal he made with some nefarious entities. I guess he was going to trade his firstborn son in order to win the crown. Ultimately, Penticus' son, Penticus V, used the blade to take his own life, denying the father's benefactors their prize, and securing the throne for his brother, Trailian V. That's just its history, though. It has a few interesting properties. Firstly, it's a ghost touch blade, meaning it can be used to harm incorporeal or ghostly enemies, as well as physical ones. Secondly, as we've seen, if someone dies while wielding the blade, their body evaporates into smoke, and their soul transfers into the black sapphire as per the Soulbind spell. Except, anyone holding the dagger can then attempt to raise the subject from the dead as though they had access to their intact body. This soul protection effect fails if a soul already occupies the gem. Alternately, as Demi did to Vadrigan, a creature holding the dagger can also speak a command word to release the trapped soul into the afterlife. The party nodded as Aurelius continued to explain. There's more as well. Now that I've attuned to the weapon, I can name up to 4 bodyguards. I want to name the 3 of you, and when I get a chance I'll add Rankle to that list as well, but until then Raja makes more sense. As long as the blade knows you all to be my named bodyguards, when I hold it, I can determine each of your locations and conditions, as per the status spell. That way I know whether you're in trouble or not. Finally, and most importantly, once per day, I can summon you all to wherever I'm at, potentially either protecting myself or protecting you. Any objections to being named a bodyguard of mine? There were naturally no objections, so Aurelius named his bodyguards. There were in fact 2 things he wished to try. First, to teleport to the Serene Circle in Axis's central district of Acton, and secondly, to summon the party back to him using the dagger as a way of testing that as well. He suggested Diyanah, as a follower of Irori, explore the Serene Circle with Demi, to aid him as their resident lore master. Marius would teleport with Aurelius back to Taldaris' home, along with Taldaris' ring and the lock of Taldaris' hair from his friend Quarit, so that Aurelius might try some additional scrying. Then, after seeing what they could glean from that, Aurelius would recall Diyanah and Demi from Acton, using the Scion's dagger. The party all agreed that this was a good use of their time before they retired to the tea house that evening. The Serene Circle, Acton, the Eternal City of Axis, 4718. Acton was the largest of Axis's districts, and effectively served as the capital district, which in effect meant it was the capital city, since Axis was the city of cities. Aurelius was still mastering this new magic, and his teleport spell was not exactly on target. They arrived on the outskirts of the district, and just as soon as he had dropped them off, Marius and Aurelius were off again to their own task. Demi and Diyanah were on their own, passing beneath sweeping bronze and gold arches. Beyond the gates, the capital stretched out like a living masterpiece, its streets laid out in concentric circles that radiated outwards from a shining heart. Demi tilted her hat, shading her eyes as she took in the view. Buildings of ivory and gold glinted in the eternal sunlight, their facades flawless, their roofs polished to a gleaming finish that reflected hues of azure and emerald. The avenues were wide and welcoming, their cobblestones arranged so seamlessly that not a single joint marred the surface. "Immaculate," Demi murmured, her voice barely audible above the symphony of sound that enveloped them. The sounds were distinct yet harmonious, the steady ringing of hammers on anvils, the melodic cries of merchants calling out their wares, and the soft murmur of countless conversations spoken in languages from across the plains. Even the crowd itself moved like a choreographed dance, each person a part of the greater rhythm of Acton. Diyanah, his golden dragon-scale coat glinting in the sunlight, watched a troop of golden automatons glide through the street, their sleek humanoid forms exuding an aura of gentle authority, offering guidance to visitors or enforcing order when needed. Nearby, a troop of monkeys assisted a merchant in unpacking a crate, their dexterous movements drawing admiring glances from passers-by. "This place is crazy," Diyanah noted. "I bet Marius would love it here. He's more of a city guy than I am." "He would, wouldn't he?" Demi said, her eyes lingering on a water fountain designed in the shape of a balanced scale. Streams of crystalline water flowed in perfect equilibrium. "It's what every city wants to be, orderly, prosperous, divine." As they moved deeper into the city, the avenues widened, leading towards the heart of the capital. Monuments rose from the earth, towering sculptures of prosperity, law, and commerce, carved with care and precision. Canals of pristine water reflected the golden light, their surfaces undisturbed by even a ripple. Following the instructions of another helpful awakened monkey, their steps carried them towards the serene circle, and the transformation in atmosphere here was immediate. Gone was the industrious hum of Acton. Here, a profound hush blanketed the air, as though the world itself held its breath in deference. The open-air plaza stretched endlessly, its perimeter dissolving into meticulously tended gardens and meandering paths. The stillness was broken only by the soft trickle of fountains and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breeze. Reflecting pools, their surfaces smooth as polished glass, mirrored the heavens above, offering an illusion of infinite depth. Pale sunlight filtered through the canopy of trees, dappling the white stone pathways with patches of gold. "You're God's domain," observed Demi. "How does it make you feel?" "Honestly," said Diyanah, "like maybe I don't belong." "Ouch," she said out loud. "You want to talk about it?" "Not really," he said, and he bottled up those feelings and kept walking. At the center of the circle rose the Grand Library, a monolithic circular structure of gray-veined marble. Its architecture was unassuming, yet undeniably elegant, every line and curve imbued with quiet gravitas. The building seemed to invite rather than impose, its great double doors standing open, welcoming all who sought knowledge. As they approached, the silent guardians of Irori made their presence known. Clad in simple robes of white, these quiet enforcers stood like statues beneath the portico, their expressions serene but their eyes watchful and sharp. Without a word, they acknowledged the visitors with slight inclinations of their heads, before returning to their stillness. "Not much for conversation, are they?" Demi quipped, while keeping her voice low enough to respect the quiet. "I'm sure we'll find someone inside who'll let us ask the right questions," said Diyanah. "But yeah, let's keep it to a whisper or they're going to kick us out." Inside the library was an expanse of hushed grandeur. Endless rows of shelves spiraled upwards, their contents organized with immaculate precision. Scrolls, tomes, and tablets of every size and color rested in their places, each a treasure of knowledge from across the plains. Scholars and pilgrims moved through the aisles with reverence, their footsteps muffled against the polished stone floor. Scattered among them, here and there, silent guardians glided through the library, their presence a gentle reminder of the rules. No words were spoken, yet the message was clear. Knowledge demanded respect. Demi gestured towards the rows of shelves. "How do we even begin to find what we're looking for?" Diyanah tilted his head, his gaze drifting to the domed ceiling above, where intricate mosaics depicted Irori's pursuit of enlightenment. "We start, I think, by looking for a librarian." Then he spotted someone in grey robes. They were cowled, and he could see them only from the back, but somehow he knew immediately this was whom he was looking for. "Follow me," he said. "I've got a good feeling about this." The robed figure turned, not a human at all, but some kind of catfolk. In place of a human's face, the visage of a striped white tiger returned their gaze. Diyanah stopped mid-stride. Demi looked at her friend and asked him if he was all right. "Yeah, sorry," he muttered. "That's one of the Pavbaga, I think." Diyanah watched as Demi's eyes glazed over for a second, a thing which she had begun to realize happened when she was looking up extraplanar types in her internal database. "Right," she said, suddenly switching her focus back to him. "Iruri's divine servitors. They take the form of white tigers. Sounds perfect. Let's go speak with him." Diyanah approached the Pavbaga and coughed slightly, and spoke in an unusually humble whisper. "We're looking for someone that might have helped an inevitable with their personal library." "Oh, he said as an afterthought. "We have these legal pursuit visa things." He showed the Pavbaga the papers Dyson had arranged for them to carry. "Because the inevitable in question has gone missing and we're trying to track him down." The Pavbaga picked up the papers. "My name is Kuram," he said, as he looked them over, and then he handed them back to Diyanah. "And you should know that your pursuit papers only cover District 55. But that's okay. I'm happy to help. This sounds like an involved story, and I could get some fresh air. Would it be all right if we stepped outside the library?" "Yeah, absolutely," said Diyanah. Kuram waved over a small arbiter inevitable, a flying sphere of gold, and he started to walk out of the library with them. "This is my personal scribe, Asim, and he also serves as an index arbiter, so he maintains a pretty comprehensive file on many sections of the library I work with. He may be able to help us find what you're looking for." Demi waved at the little robot, and it offered her a respectful nod in return. She had at this time met a few arbiter inevitables. There was, of course, Factor 12 in the Senate archives, there was Ifalt C, who oversaw the mail archives, and there had been several others that they had bumped into while in Axis, but this was the first one that gave the impression of being solemn and quiet. She was fascinated that these creatures could possess such a range of personalities. Kuram led them to a tranquil spot on the grounds near an artfully sculpted water fountain. Two stone benches adorned with throw pillows facing each other and separated by a table of wicker and reed were located here, in an alcove of freshly cut topiaries. "This seems like a great place to have a more involved discussion," he said, taking a seat. "Now, how do two mortals come to be in possession of a District 55 pursuit visa, and how can the Serene Circle help?" Diyanah seemed flustered for a moment, so Demi stepped in. "We're from the country of Taldor, in the world of Galarian. We came to Axis with the aid of a psychopomp, who introduced us to a sorceress named Hao Jin, who serves as an agent of the Eternal City. So effectively, we're here on her behalf, but also on our own behalf. Because you see, the inevitable that's gone missing, it isn't just any inevitable. It's actually the post-mortal form of our own country's beloved founder. His name is Taldaris." "I know Galarian very well, actually, and I know of famous Taldaris. It was my world too once," said Kuram. "In fact, most of us in the Serene Circle are from Galarian. Irori lived his mortal life in our world, after all, and his faith is still new enough not to have spread across the cosmos. I never visited Taldor in my mortal life, but I do know the teachings of Irori are well embraced in parts of that country." Kuram nodded at Diyanah, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I see that you wear the robes of an Iroran monk under your very shiny coat," noted the tiger-like man. "Were you trained at one of your Iroran monasteries in Taldor?" "We do have a few scattered around," said Diyanah. "It's true. But we Taldans are notoriously undisciplined, and it was my father that suggested I needed some more stern tutelage to keep me on the right path. He felt the monasteries in Taldor were not suitable in that regard, so actually I was trained at the Stepped Temple in Osirian." Kuram now chuckled. "It cannot be. I now see it as no coincidence you spotted me across the library. Irori's secret hand is surely at work. I was from Osirian in my mortal life, and though I trained elsewhere, I taught for a while at the Stepped Temple." He laughed to himself, and he turned his cat-like face upwards as he tried to recall the life he had once had. "I died 400 years ago. I'm sure it has changed now." And then with a sudden thought he asked, "Did the Leaning Tower ever fall into the sea?" No, they fixed that long before I started my studies," said Diyanah. "I mean, it's still a little crooked, to be honest." "Oh, good," said Kuram. "That's nice to hear. Well, how can the Grand Library help?" Diyanah was feeling a little better after this exchange, and took over the conversation. He was the Auroran monk, after all. "Taldaris had a library. When we went to explore his house, there was some kind of creature made of worms that was eating the books in the library. We thought if we could figure out what books it had destroyed, that it might give us a clue as to why he had been taken." Kuram nodded. "That would certainly make sense. What do you know so far?" "Well, Demi here has perfect recall, so she can tell you exactly which books survived the encounter with the worm things, and which books were already partially digested." Demi explained that they were all Taldan history books, and she explained the periods they covered, and also described the leather jackets on some of the books she was not able to identify. Kuram had an exchange with his arbiter companion Asim, but very soon Demi and Asim were conversing directly as they tried to figure out together what books might have been destroyed. While they exchanged, Kuram's gaze turned to Diyanah. "Sounds like Asim and your friend will get to the bottom of this. While they work it out, may I ask what's troubling you?" Diyanah froze for a moment. What makes you think I'm troubled?" he said. "This is a place of peace," said the Pavbaga. "People that come here often feel more at peace. I can sense when someone is in discomfort, especially one of our own." I don't really know how to talk about this, to be honest, said Diyanah. It's really complicated. He struggled for words, for a moment, but then he started to talk, and once he did, the floodgates were opened, and he began to let everything out. All right, so I was the host for a dead spirit for most of my life. My temple training, I thought it was about finding self-discipline, but what I was actually learning to do was to suppress the ghost inside me. Now the ghost is gone, and I don't know who I am, or if this was ever the right path for me, or... I'm not a peaceful person by nature. If I'm completely honest, Irori teaches the mastery of mind, body, and soul. I think I've got the body part figured out. Nobody throws a punch better than me. But the other two, I feel like I'm back to square one on mind and soul. Sounds like you know exactly how to talk about it, chuckled Karam. Yeah, that was weird, said Diyanah. I can't believe I got all that off my chest. It's this place, indicated Karam. If you let it, the Serene Circle will really help you find your peace. What if I'm not a peaceful person? Asked Diyanah. You know, Irori wasn't a particularly peaceful person either for most of his mortal life, noted Karam. Diyanah raised an eyebrow, so Karam continued. Think about it. His main holy book, the Asvadeva Pujila, is basically just a summary of the various adventures he went on throughout Vudra. Most of the stories are pretty action-packed. Finding peace for him required a journey, and there were plenty of times I'm sure he thought he'd never find it. His best friend was a tiger. Does that sound like someone who was afraid to get in a scrap? Diyanah laughed. Karam was referring to Chu Chem, the ghost tiger, the first of the Pavbhagas. The reason Irori's divine servitors took the form of tigers was largely because of her. She remained one of Irori's most powerful divine servitors in her mortal life. That's pretty cool, said Diyanah. I forgot about that. I sometimes think my best friend is my lion Raja these days. Don't tell Aurelius I said that, though. You're kidding. You have a pet lion. You're a regular Taldan Irori, then, if you ask me. I'd love to meet your friend. Big lion isn't going to freak everyone out, is it? Asked Diyanah. Not in the Serene Circle. Animals find it very peaceful here, noted Karam. Diyanah pulled the Raja figurine from his pouch and awakened him. Ha ha, laughed Karam again. He looks grand. Don't judge me too much for this. Karam suddenly shifted forms, from human to animal, taking the form of a mighty striped white tiger. He danced around with Raja, and they chased each other in the garden. Diyanah watched them as he did so. He couldn't help but feel many of the worries in his heart simply melt away. Karam reverted to humanoid form and sat down next to Diyanah. He seemed winded. He took a moment to catch his breath. That's a great lion, he said at last. His time here may change him. The blessings of the Pavbhaga may make him more intelligent than others of his kind. Be good to him. Then after a pause he added, And don't worry if you feel like you haven't figured everything out yet. The real secret is, of course, nobody has. Demi and Asim had wrapped up their discussion at this point. We think we figured it out, Diyanah. The books that were destroyed, they all covered succession crises during the early years of the Taldan Empire. It seems they actually had some sort of procedure for situations like this, but they've obviously largely been lost to time. I mean, 7,000 years is a really, really long time for an empire to stick around, so it's no surprise that there were things we did then that we've almost completely forgotten about now. Asim appeared to print out a list on some ticker tape that extended from its central mass and handed it over to Demi. There you go, it said. A list of the most likely books to have been consumed. Karam can now take you to the appropriate sections of the library to check them out. The home of First Emperor Taldaris, Sayashto, Eternal City of Axis, 4718. Aurelius and Marius had gone back to Taldaris' home after dropping off Demi and Diyanah in Acton. Marius was on guard duty, while Aurelius set up a fairly elaborate set of scrying foci. These included the inscription of a magical circle on the ground near Taldaris' desk. It also included around the circle the lock of his hair, the 3 pressed lilies in the locket he had given Quarret so long ago, and Taldaris' ring. Aurelius also steeled himself for resistance to his scrying. In particular, his focus was on confirming that Taldaris was indeed being held in Duskfathom. He tried to recall the divine magic he experienced battling the cults of Norgorber in Opara after the massacre, the sensation of it, its unique signature, how it made him feel. When he was ready, he closed his eyes and extended his senses outwards. It was as Haojin had said, something was interfering with detection magic. He felt around the edges of his spell, trying to sense the entity that opposed him. He felt that it knew what it was doing. It was aware of his searching. It must have had some form of scrying detection up. That was all right. Aurelius recalled Panavar's overconfidence. By comparison, Aurelius was but a small gnat, after all. Why hide from someone so beneath you? Goaded Aurelius. Aurelius kept seeking around in his mind's eye. With almost intentional simplicity, his efforts were working. Something looked right back at him, offering him a glimpse into his enemy. For a brief second he thought he saw Taldaris in chains, a mighty inevitable construct of black marble clad in thick adamantine plate armor, but only for a moment, because then he saw something else, a broad, muscular human man, it looked like at first, shirtless and carrying a twin set of wicked short swords, growing from his back a great black scorpion's tail. The figure in his mind's eye suddenly looked at him intently, and the young wizard was suddenly ejected from the mindscape with such force that Aurelius was almost propelled across the room. Marius raced over to help him up to his feet. "What was that?" asked the Brawler as he helped him up. "Just goading the thing hiding Taldaris," said Aurelius, "and confirming what Uyat told us. It's the stabbing beast that has him, the Herald of Norgorber, and is being held in Duskfathom, probably at the stabbing beast's lair. And what are we going to do about that?" "I think we're going to have to ask Hao Jin what to do about that," suggested Aurelius. The Pactyl Tea House, Syashto, Eternal City of Axis, 4718. Aurelius and Marius were in the back room of the Pactyl Tea House, and it was getting quite late, well past the dinner hour, when a planar gate suddenly appeared in the room, and Hao Jin and her companion Dyson stepped through the magical gate. They were accompanied by another alien-looking woman who was unknown to the two of them. Her skin was purple, and decorated with a number of sharp thorns. "Where are the others?" asked Hao Jin of Aurelius, without even bothering to say hello. "They're in Acton at the Serene Circle of Irori, trying to gather as much information as possible about the books destroyed in Taldaris' library. I was trying to buy them as much time as possible, but I'll recall them now. Give me a second." Aurelius pulled out his knife and concentrated on it for a moment. Suddenly Demi, Diyanah, and Raja appeared in the room with them. Demi was holding a stack of books, and was so caught off guard by the teleportation that she nearly dropped them. "I'm not sure we had finished checking all these out," she said nervously. Aurelius caught Hao Jin giving him a look that indicated she was impressed with his magical tricks. It was, of course, the magic of the Scion's dagger, not his own, but he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride anyway. "Here we are, all gathered," he said. "Hopefully the library will understand when we return all the books." "Excellent," said Hao Jin. "I have some important updates for all of you, and I'd love to hear how your own investigation has been going. Shall I start?" "Yeah, absolutely," said Aurelius. "First, let me introduce Bakira here," said Hao Jin. "Bakira comes from a Shulsaga tribe of Leviathan herders, and such astral Leviathans graze on naturally occurring demiplanes on the fringes of reality. Bakira, tell them what you told me," she instructed. Bakira was clearly not comfortable being in this place. It was not clear what Hao Jin had said to coerce her, but the Shulsaga was lean and muscular, and not used to civilization. "Our head had stopped at a place where the astral plane breaches with the ethereal one. Our head is large, but many rifts in reality had formed at the place of this breach. Some were larger than others, and a few we descended into and explored to see if there was anything of interest to our tribe. One was a grimy thing, a building of endless corridors composed of dream stuff, walls of white tiles and grey, rusted pipes. At the center of the plane, a great void reaching up into unthinkable heavens. We called it Rukuk, the rusted dreaming." Hao Jin nodded. "It's pretty close to exactly what Diyanah described, so I asked Bakira here and her tribe what had happened to it. Well, we disliked the place, so we guided our herd to avoid it as well, hoping the maelstrom might reclaim it. Before we left, though, we saw the ethereal plane open it, a great rift split open. Beyond it, a city of black stepped pyramids, and a plain of fire and misery." "There is only one place like that. She was seeing Xibalba, the city of the Sakils," explained Hao Jin. "That place swallowed up the demiplane. It went with them," concluded Bakira. "Are you saying Panavar's private demiplane is inside the Sakil realm of Xibalba?" asked Aurelius. "Yes, once inside the demiplane it would be a realm apart," suggested Hao Jin, "but Xibalba may be the only reliable means of reaching it." "Well, this isn't exactly a surprise," said Demi. "Panavar had dealings with the Sakils. That they helped him secure a private demiplane would make sense." "What chance would we have of fighting our way into Xibalba, finding the demiplane, and confronting Panavar?" asked Marius. "What you're describing, Marius, would be challenging even for me," said Hao Jin. Then she looked over at Dyson and indicated that they had gotten all they could from Bakira, and he could return her to her tribe. Well, we have 3 leads now, I guess, said Aurelius, and they all lead somewhere awful. 3 leads? Asked Hao-Jin. What else have you learned while I've been away? Well, let's start with Taldaris. We tracked down some of the co-conspirators involved in his capture, including a psychic flock of birds and a vortex dragon. They indicated that the stabbing beast, the Herald of Norgorber, was the one holding Taldaris. Based on that intelligence, and some of Taldaris' personal effects, I did some pretty intrusive scrying earlier today, and confirmed what they told me. I am pretty confident he's being held in Duskfathom by Norgorber's most powerful agent. That is troubling, said Hao-Jin. Any idea why? No, that I haven't been able to figure out yet, said Aurelius. But I think I may have figured it out, said Demi. I've been reviewing Taldan history books for the last few hours at the library. The books being destroyed, they all covered periods of early Taldan history in which there had been a succession crisis. Demi flipped open a book she had collected from the library and laid it out in front of them. In the early days of the Empire, there were fewer connected bloodlines, and fewer individuals who could claim blood ties back to Taldaris. They occasionally needed a way to decide who was worthy of the title of Emperor, so they had this. She indicated a picture in the book of a cape of white lion fur. This was called the Mantle of Kings. It was reportedly enchanted by his mentor and advisor, who then simply went by the title of the Archwizard. You mean Aroden, said Aurelius, pulling the book closer to get a better look. Yes, exactly, said Demi. Apparently Aroden put a sliver of Taldaris' own soul into the mantle, making it a powerful magical relic. According to these sources, if the succession is in question, the mantle's custodian would place it upon the shoulders of a prospective monarch, and it would essentially act as Taldaris' own consciousness, assessing the individual's worthiness and glowing with a bright light if the candidate was worthy. I see, said Marius. So if we found the mantle, there might be another way of proving that Eutropia is the rightful next empress. Where's the mantle now? Asked Aurelius. It's unclear, said Demi, but I bet Taldaris would know. So he was kidnapped to make sure the line of succession stayed muddy, said Diyanah. Yeah, it's pretty clear Panevar orchestrated Taldaris' kidnapping, said Aurelius. Oh yes, and we should mention something else. The Exaltation Day massacre in Taldor, when the old emperor went insane and he had the Senate attacked by assassins, those assassins were all Norgorberites. At the same time, Taldaris went missing here in Axis, and Norgorber was also involved. So Panevar is fond of making dangerous alliances, observed Hao-Jin. Both the Sackles and Norgorber are not to be trifled with. She took a moment to consider all this information, and then she said, And you mentioned a third lead as well. Yeah, said Aurelius. The last thing we came across basically by accident. I'm not going to dance around this at all. You deserve all the truth. We went into Duskfathom at one point. Hao-Jin raised an eyebrow. You must have given your monkey inspector friend the slip. Yes, we did, said Diyanah. Didn't seem like his kind of place. Hao-Jin just nodded for Aurelius to continue. Anyway, you remember we said a denizen of Leng called the Placid One had stolen Prince Carius, who is Eutropia's younger brother, and arguably also has a claim to the throne? Well, Diyanah picked up a Leng ruby from him, and we took it down to Duskfathom and gave it to a Naga who was interested in it. The ruby and the Placid One were still connected, though. She managed to break the connection, and she has since kept the ruby. But in the course of those events, we learned from her that the Placid One is still holding Prince Carius, in a place in the Plateau of Leng that she called, Aurelius fished out his notes, which included the map Klakosik had drawn for them, called the Floating Islands of Ulam Slough. Sounds like another delightful place. Hao-Jin took a seat and looked contemplative for a while. So 3 paths lie before us. We can enter Xibalba and seek out the Rusted Dreaming to confront Panevar Lothid. We can travel to Duskfathom and try to infiltrate the Lost Silhouette to rescue Taldaris. Or we risk the journey to the Plateau of Leng and the floating islands of Ulam Slough to recover the prince from the denizens of Leng. Obviously, the Godmind's priority is the return of Taldaris, but it's clear all of these events are connected, and following any one of these paths may make attempting a different path more difficult. The Godmind has given me a good deal of leniency in terms of how I go about resolving this matter, and it also seems like this whole conspiracy is deeply tied into the fate of your country. So, I think it's fair to ask all of you, my mortal heroes from Taldor, what would you like to do next? The companions all looked at each other, and they all seemed of the same mind at the same time. We should go to Leng, they all seemed to say at once. Our first priority has to be finding the prince, confirmed Aurelius. Haojin nodded solemnly. Well, you guys beat up and shook down a vortex dragon, and you braved Klakosik's pleasure garden in Duskfathom, so I know you're a formidable group, but I'd still like to get a little more help going into a place like Leng. I'm calling Zan. Marius winced slightly. Zan will try to kill Carius, he said. Then you convince him not to, she replied, because it doesn't make any sense to go into a plane corrupted by the powers of the Dark Tapestry without an elder psychopomp when he's the one most eager to see this thing through. Okay, said Marius, because she was right, and they needed all the help they could get. You call him. I'll try to reason with him. Then Zan was among them, his form appearing suddenly as he stepped out from a swirl of ghostly ravens. You have found him, he said, a strangely pleased tone in his voice. I will journey with you, and I will bring Pharasma's justice to those who hide from death. Before we go, Zan, said Marius, we should talk about what we're going to do when we find the boy. We send him on his way, said Zan. The path is clear. I want you to let him live, said Marius. Abomination, uttered Zan. Hear me out. Not a special extended life. Just a normal, regular human life. And then you come for him when his life is over. Why? Said Zan, vaguely annoyed. Because he never got to live his life. Because he was just an innocent child once. Your fight is with Panavar, not with Carius. It never was with Carius. He was the victim. If you kill Carius, you may never find Panavar. But if Carius lives, you will draw him out. Then we can kill Panavar Lothi together, I promise you. Zan seemed to consider these words intently. Very well, he said at last. You are most persuasive, but you should know that I will judge how clean Carius's soul is myself when we find him. If it displeases me, I will reassess. Marius nodded nervously. Sure, that seems fair. The party readied itself. The next leg of their journey, the dreaded Plateau of Leng. End of chapter. Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. You've just watched Season 4, Episode 4 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. In this particular episode, my adventuring party shakes down the dragon Uyat for some information, and then they go on a couple more little side quests. Aurelius does some scrying with Marius, and Demi and Diyanah go to the Great Library in the Serene Circle. I talked a little bit about this in my first recap for this season. I really wanted to make sure each of the characters had a moment to confront something of meaning in the Outer Planes, so that this wasn't just a fun extraplanar romp, but had some character significance. Diyanah actually ended up kind of randomly with two of those events. Obviously in this episode he goes to the Serene Circle and he confronts his relationship with Aurori, but also in this season we got to see Diyanah interacting with his grandparents. Sometimes you plan things, like the Serene Circle was planned, and sometimes things happen because the players prompt you. So at some point Diyanah was having that conversation where Diyanah was chatting with Zaphod and was like, hey, I've got this gem I want to sell. He had organically asked about whether there were any Frascati relatives that lived in the area. And I just on a whim was like, yes, there are. and then that became a central point in the story because they were located close to where the flock of birds were. Anyway, it's kind of cool that sometimes you plan for this character connective tissue, and sometimes the players will bring it to you. The last thing that I want to talk about here in this episode recap is that the party finally finds out about the Mantle of Kings. Now, this is very backwards because in the adventure is written, the Mantle of Kings is the whole reason they go to the Outer Planes. But in the way that my story unfolded, they went to the Outer Planes chasing Carius and Panavar, and then they discovered that obviously the first Emperor Taldaris has gone missing, but they don't know why. And so the Mantle of Kings ended up being a central mystery that sort of is essentially the reason that Taldaris is kidnapped, is because Panavar doesn't want anyone to know about this artifact that can certify a ruler. And so this then became a sort of central MacGuffin for the course of this adventure. And as we'll see towards the end of this adventure, that MacGuffin ends up in the possession of one of my players, and that becomes quite a cool moment. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and there's another one coming at you in a couple of weeks.